They called her the Virgin Queen, a ruler so powerful, so untouchable, that her very body became a symbol of the English crown. But what if that body wasn't what history told us it was? What if beneath the layers of white makeup, the stiff corsets, and the regal gowns, lay a secret so shocking that historians buried it for centuries? This is not the story found in textbooks. This is the disturbing truth about Queen Elizabeth I, and what her body truly revealed after death. Our story begins not in her glittering court, but in the cold stillness of 1603, the year Elizabeth Tudor took her final breath. The queen who had ruled for 44 years, who had defied popes, kings, and assassins, now lay silent in her chambers at Richmond Palace. Those who were present described her corpse as pale as parchment, her lips shrunken, and her frame slight as bone. But when her attendants undressed her body for the last time, they found something unexpected, something that made them exchange frightened glances, whispering hurriedly as they covered her again. For centuries, what they saw remained a secret, buried in the private notes of physicians and courtiers, and locked away in the vaults of the crown. To understand why, we must return to the life of Elizabeth herself, a life shaped by trauma, secrecy, and control. Born in 1533 to King Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn, Elizabeth's life began in blood. Her mother was executed before her eyes could even remember her face, beheaded on her father's orders. Elizabeth was declared illegitimate, then reinstated, then watched as her father married again and again, leaving a trail of death and betrayal. From childhood, she learned one lesson: trust no one, and never show weakness. When she became queen in 1558, she was just 25. England was divided, bankrupt, and surrounded by enemies. She would have to become more than a woman, she would have to become a myth. Her advisors quickly built that image, the untouchable Virgin Queen. Unmarried, pure, divine. Her very body became a political weapon. To marry meant losing power. To stay single meant control. But that choice came at a terrible cost, one that would follow her to the grave. Contemporaries described Elizabeth as otherworldly. Her skin, powdered ghost white. Her hair, often covered by elaborate wigs. Her teeth, blackened from sugar. She banned mirrors in her later years. But there was something else, something even her closest servants whispered about. One lady-in-waiting wrote that the queen's figure was not as other women's are, and that her gowns were made with unusual padding and stiff bodices, to shape the body to appear womanly. Such remarks were dangerous. Elizabeth's rule was built on her image as the perfect queen, and any suggestion of deformity, illness, or physical abnormality could destroy that illusion. Yet rumors spread that she had scars, that her body was malformed, or that she even suffered from some secret disease that left her unable to bear children. But no one dared confirm it. When Elizabeth died, her body was prepared by the royal embalmers, men sworn to silence. According to accounts later found in obscure archives, her corpse presented uncommon features that shocked them. Her skin, beneath the layers of powder, was mottled and rough. Her chest and shoulders bore strange marks, perhaps from years of tight corsetra, or something deeper. Some even claimed her body showed signs of hormonal imbalance, a lack of breast development, a masculine bone structure. Could the Virgin Queen's body have hidden an intersex condition, a truth impossible for her time to understand? It may sound like rumor, but fragments of evidence scattered across 4 centuries suggest otherwise. Physicians' letters, court gossip, and even portraits hint that Elizabeth's body did not conform to traditional femininity. In an era obsessed with lineage and heirs, that would have been catastrophic. Her inability to produce a child was publicly attributed to her virtue, but what if it was something biological? What if the Virgin Queen was not simply celibate, but physically incapable of reproduction? Modern historians long dismissed such theories as slander, the work of her enemies, especially Catholic propagandists who hated her Protestant rule. But in the mid-20th century, something unexpected surfaced. A private collection of Tudor medical notes, belonging to one of Elizabeth's personal physicians, hinted at a secret diagnosis, though written in cryptic Latin. It referred to defectus natura mulibris, literally, a defect of the female nature. The context suggested a medical condition related to her reproductive anatomy. For obvious reasons, this note was never publicized in Elizabeth's lifetime, or for hundreds of years after. To reveal that England's mighty queen was physically abnormal, would have been political suicide for the monarchy. So the story was suppressed, rewritten, and eventually forgotten. And yet, her portraits tell their own story. Compare the early images of Elizabeth, youthful, radiant, her hair loose and her face unpainted, to those of her later reign. By her 40s, she demanded her artists depict her face as ageless, unchanging. Painters who showed her as old or sick were punished or banished. She controlled every brushstroke, every detail. The result? The mask of youth, an illusion that hid decay beneath paint and pearl. But was that mask only symbolic, or literal? In 1953, when historians re-examined Elizabeth's preserved clothing at Westminster Abbey, they discovered something odd. The corsets and bodices were heavily reinforced in ways that suggested they weren't just for fashion, they were for concealment. A modern textile analyst noted the structure was meant to shape, restrict, and disguise the body underneath, not simply flatter it. For the first time, scholars began to suspect what courtiers in 1603 might have seen: that Elizabeth's body, once stripped of its royal armor, looked nothing like the myth England worshipped. Some even proposed she suffered from a rare endocrine disorder, perhaps Turner syndrome, which can cause infertility, short stature, and certain physical traits that Elizabeth was rumored to have. Others speculated she had a hormonal imbalance that affected her voice, hair, and appearance. But whether medical or mythical, the truth terrified her court. Because the Queen's body was not just her own, it was England's body. To admit it was imperfect would have meant admitting that the entire Tudor image of divine rule was a lie. So they hid it. The embalmers sealed her body in layers of linen, packed her coffin with spices, and buried her in Westminster Abbey with royal honors. The notes that described her remains were destroyed or sealed away. The world was told she died peacefully, beautiful even in death. But the whispers never stopped. Even her successor, King James I, is said to have avoided speaking of her. When her tomb was opened decades later to move her remains beside her half-sister Mary, one witness noted the surprising smallness of her coffin, as if the woman inside had been far slighter than the statues and portraits suggested. Was this the final evidence of the secret her court hid? Or just coincidence? No one could say. But the myth of the Virgin Queen remained intact, until curious historians began digging centuries later, uncovering scraps of letters, coded medical terms, and the faint echo of a secret too dangerous for her own age. One phrase appears repeatedly in old Tudor archives: Her Majesty's body must never be spoken of. And yet, here we are, 400 years later, still asking, what did they see when they prepared her body? What was the truth so terrifying that even her enemies remained silent about it? In Part 2, we follow the trail of evidence, from sealed archives and forgotten burial records to the strange physical clues that survive to this day. And what they reveal about Queen Elizabeth's body, and her final moments, may change how we understand the most powerful woman in English history. The coffin of Queen Elizabeth I lies deep beneath the floor of Westminster Abbey, sealed in marble and silence. For centuries, few dared question what rested inside. The Virgin Queen had become more than a monarch. She was legend, a symbol of English power, and questioning her meant questioning history itself. But history, as always, leaves traces. In the late 1800s, during minor restoration work at Westminster, archivists stumbled upon a forgotten inventory, a list of royal possessions moved during the burial of Elizabeth's remains. Among the items was an entry that raised eyebrows: an iron-bound chest, containing certain medical records of Her Majesty, not to be opened without warrant of the Crown. The chest was never found. But its mention reignited whispers that something about Elizabeth's body was hidden deliberately, not lost by accident. What were they protecting? To find the answer, we must look at what was known, and more importantly, what was erased. For 400 years, official biographies of Queen Elizabeth I described her as the embodiment of purity, intelligence, and divine destiny. She was the woman who refused all men, who wedded her country instead of a husband. But behind that image stood a network of men, advisors, secretaries, and spies, who managed the story of her body like a state secret. One of those men was Sir Francis Walsingham, Elizabeth's spymaster. He intercepted letters, silenced rumors, and destroyed any record that could endanger the Queen's image. In 1581, one of his captured correspondences revealed that a Catholic propagandist in France had attempted to publish a book accusing Elizabeth of unnatural infirmities of the flesh. Walsingham ordered every copy burned. None survive, but his effort to erase the rumor only proves how real the fear was. Throughout her life, Elizabeth surrounded herself with strict privacy. No one, not even her closest ladies, saw her undressed after her early 30s. Bathing was done in total secrecy. She even banned doctors from touching her directly. One physician later admitted, "We must observe her pulse through silk." Such extreme modesty seemed strange, even for a queen of her time. Was it vanity? Or was she hiding something, perhaps scars, deformities, or signs of a condition she couldn't explain? As Elizabeth aged, her physical decline became impossible to hide. In 1598, a foreign ambassador described her as a skeleton wrapped in jewels. He noted that her hands trembled, her speech sometimes slurred, and that she walked as one whose body pained her greatly. Yet despite her frailty, she refused all medical examination. She would rather die than let her secrets be exposed. When death came in 1603, the royal physicians were ordered to embalm her, with discretion and haste. That phrase, "with discretion," appears nowhere else in Tudor embalming records. It meant silence. The men who prepared her body would never speak of what they saw. But a few lines in the private notes of Dr. Thomas Aylmer, her attending physician, survived the centuries. The note, translated from Latin, reads, "Her Majesty's form was of unusual composition, her frame slight and hard, her breasts undeveloped, her limbs showing signs of long confinement in rigid garments. Certain parts differed from the common order of women. It was vague, deliberately so. But its meaning was unmistakable. Elizabeth's anatomy was not typical." Historians now believe drive. Aylmer was describing traits consistent with an intersex condition, possibly androgen insensitivity syndrome, in which a person has female appearance but male chromosomes, rendering them infertile. Others propose she suffered from a rare form of hypogonadism caused by lifelong stress and malnutrition. If true, the Virgin Queen title was not just political, but biological. And this changes everything. Imagine the consequences had this truth emerged in 16th century England. A woman who could not bear children was already pitied. But a monarch who was physically different, whose body blurred the boundaries of gender, that would have been seen as a divine curse, or worse, an omen. Her enemies would have seized it as proof that her rule defied nature. The Catholic Church, already calling her a heretic bastard, would have declared her unfit to reign. Civil war could have erupted. The safest choice, for her, and for England, was silence. The body of the Queen became a fortress, her secret hidden behind layers of silk and ritual. Her painted face, her heavy wigs, her gowns that concealed every curve, they weren't just vanity. They were armor. There's another piece of evidence, one long ignored. In 1603, the Earl of Nottingham wrote a private letter describing the Queen's final hours. He noted that as she lay dying, she would not suffer her bed to be approached nor her body to be touched, saying she could not bear the eyes of men upon her weakness. That refusal continued even in death. When her coffin was sealed, only 3 attendants were allowed near her, all sworn to secrecy by royal decree. Over time, that silence became legend. The idea of the Virgin Queen turned from necessity into mythology. Painters immortalized her as radiant and ageless, poets compared her to goddesses. Every trace of frailty or humanity was scrubbed from history. But the truth lingered in odd details: her refusal to marry, her obsession with control, her violent temper when questioned about her appearance. Even her motto, "Semper Idem," always the same, sounds less like pride and more like defense. Always the same, because change would reveal too much. Fast forward to modern times. In the 20th century, as forensic anthropology advanced, researchers petitioned the Church of England to allow limited examination of Elizabeth's remains, not to desecrate them, but to answer centuries-old questions. The request was quietly denied. Officially, to preserve the sanctity of royal burials. Unofficially, some suspect, to keep the mystery intact. No one has seen the Queen's bones since her coffin was sealed more than 400 years ago. Still, technology and science gave new life to old clues. Medical historians analyzed her portraits and descriptions, looking for patterns. They noted her elongated facial features, narrow shoulders, and angular jaw, consistent with the traits mentioned in the physician's notes. The evidence isn't conclusive, but it's compelling enough that some scholars now openly entertain the possibility that Elizabeth was intersex or infertile. If that's true, then her greatest deception wasn't moral, it was survival. Elizabeth's reign depended entirely on her image as a woman of divine perfection. In an age when women were seen as fragile, she had to embody strength without appearing masculine, purity without seeming cold, and authority without losing her humanity. To reveal that her body didn't fit the mold could have destroyed her throne. So she crafted her own myth, and perhaps that's what makes her story so haunting. Even now, 4 centuries later, her secret remains entombed with her. The marble effigy above her grave shows her as she wanted to be remembered, serene, flawless, eternal. Yet beneath that stone lies the human truth, fragile, mysterious, and forever hidden. And maybe that's fitting. Because Queen Elizabeth I built her entire legacy on control of her kingdom, her court, her image, and above all, her body. She ruled a world that would have devoured her if it had seen her vulnerability. In the end, her secret died with her, preserved not by malice but by loyalty. Historians may one day uncover more documents, decode more letters, or even open her tomb. But whether they find confirmation or only dust, one truth will remain. The Virgin Queen's greatest power was not her crown, nor her armies, nor her empire, it was her silence. And in that silence, she ensured that her story would never truly end, because every mystery left unsolved keeps her alive in the minds of those who still ask. Who is Elizabeth Tudor, really?